I'm Elizabeth Corey, professor at Baylor and director of the honors program. Particularly relevant for this gathering, for the academic year 18-19, I'm also serving as the American Enterprise Institute, or AEI's, Values and Capitalism Visiting Professor, which is an initiative started by your speaker, Arthur Brooks, a few years ago. Values and Capitalism is an initiative run by Tyler Castle, who is also here today, and it's a program that engages specifically Christian higher education to do a couple of things: to advance a moral case for free enterprise, and to understand and promote the conditions necessary for human flourishing. Fairly important things there. The program involves a number of faculty members, administrators, professionals, and it tries to equip Christian college students with the knowledge, networks, and opportunities necessary to be thoughtful leaders in their vocations and in their future careers. What this means for me in my role this year, I've been traveling around the country to various Christian schools, meeting faculty and staff and students, and giving talks about things that I hope are of interest to them. Baylor is particularly glad to be an institutional partner with AEI, and today we especially want to thank our sponsors, the Baugh Center for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise, as well as the Baylor in Washington program. So my task here is to introduce a student who is a Baylor graduate. His name is Danny Huizinga. At Baylor, Danny was in the Baylor Business Fellows program, and he graduated in 2015 with majors in economics and finance and minors in political science and mathematics. Some of you may know him also as a writer for The Lariat. Now, Daniel is a management consultant at Accenture in Washington, D.C., and this is, if you don't know it, a global management consulting firm focusing on strategy for nonprofit, education, and state and local government clients. He also leads Accenture's wealth creation community, a team of 30 Accenture employee volunteers dedicated to improving financial literacy for thousands of employees around the country by teaching sessions on budgeting, investing, and saving for retirement. In his free time, Danny is a business and policy columnist. Again, all of this started at Baylor. He's also begun a nonprofit dedicated to economic development and community improvement in Kenya with a professor at Baylor. He's a distinguished alum, and he serves on the Baylor in Washington Alumni Steering Committee. So we're glad to have him here this afternoon. He's flown in all the way from DC. Danny.
Good afternoon, everybody. You didn't come to hear me speak, so I'll try to be pretty quick. But just want to give you a little bit of the background for our speaker and how lucky you are to be here today. So my name is Daniel Huizinga, as Dr. Corey said. So 7 years ago, as a freshman at Baylor, a friend actually handed me this book, The Road to Freedom, by Arthur Brooks, who you're about to hear from tonight. And I'll admit, when I first got the book, I looked at it, I was kind of skeptical. I was like, the road to freedom? Like, is that what Texans call I-35 or something? Like, what is this? I don't know. But I opened it, and I actually read it, and it was incredible. It actually changed the way that I think, and I think it still affects the way that I approach debating or discussing with friends today. So after reading that book, I realized I wanted to learn more about what this person, Arthur Brooks, was talking about. So I looked him up. It turns out he's the head of a think tank called the American Enterprise Institute, or AEI, in Washington, D.C. So I flew up to AEI that summer, and it's a long story, but I kind of snuck into a conference for Christian college students. I was the only Baylor student there, but I heard from Arthur Brooks in person and a number of other scholars there, and was just blown away by how we could have good, thoughtful debates on policy issues without attacking people. And that was really a revolutionary idea. And so I came back to Baylor, and I told everybody I could. I said, we really need to partner with this organization. We need to do something on campus. We need to bring speakers here. And so my senior year, I founded the Baylor AEI Executive Council, which still exists today. And we brought Arthur Brooks my senior year, which was a really great event. I think students really enjoyed what he had just published in one of his most recent books. And tonight, he has also just published another book, which you can find out there, called Love Your Enemies, so definitely check that out afterwards as well. But I think what's great is once I graduated, there's a lot of people who really took up this mission of promoting AEI around campus. So I just want to take a moment first to thank all the students on the AEI Executive Council at Baylor today. So you don't know I'm going to make you do this, but if you could just stand up real quick, and thanks to all of you who helped plan this event. So go for it. Here we go. So these students and their leadership is what made events like this possible, and I'd really encourage you to get in touch with them about all the other great things they're planning around campus. Baylor and AEI now have a really strong partnership. We have Baylor students interning at AEI and participating in their honors programs every summer. We hired to lead the Baylor and Washington, D.C. program someone from AEI, who is Molly Moore, a really incredible asset to Baylor. We have a Baylor student flying up to AEI tomorrow to present a winning paper in a competition they did. The Baylor Executive Council won a competition for all 110 executive councils around the country. So there's a lot of great things happening, and I think this partnership is really an incredible thing for Baylor and for AEI as well. So for our speaker tonight, I'm deeply honored to return and introduce Dr. Arthur Brooks 4 years after his first visit my senior year. I don't know if you watched the news recently, but politics seems to have changed a lot in the last 4 years. And I think Dr. Brooks has been a very important voice in this world about helping us understand how to love our enemies. How can we not attack the people that we disagree with? So he writes columns in the Washington Post, or the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. He just produced a feature-length documentary called The Pursuit. He just published a new book, as I mentioned. And through all these different avenues and speeches like tonight, I think he really helps people to understand how to do that, how to love your enemies, even when you disagree with them. So before becoming president of AEI, Dr. Brooks was a professor at Syracuse. Before that, he also spent 12 years as a classical musician, which I'm sure he'll tell you a lot about. So he has a non-traditional path, and I think that gives him a really unique perspective as he helps you understand some of what he's recently written about. This is his 10th and final year as president of AEI, and he'll soon join the Harvard Kennedy School as a professor of the practice of public leadership and also as a senior fellow at Harvard Business School. So we are really lucky tonight to have Dr. Arthur Brooks, and please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Danny, and thanks to all of you. Great to be back at Baylor. Thanks for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedules. It's springtime. I know there's a lot going on. And I'm kind of hoping that this new book that I've written will be interesting to you, because I bet you all want to love your enemies, or at least you feel like you should want to love your enemies a little bit more. What does that mean? That's what I'm going to talk about here tonight in the context of politics. You know, everybody knows how bitter things have gotten in the United States today. 1 in 6 Americans have stopped talking to a family member or a close friend because of politics. 1 in 6, almost 1 in 5. And at the same time, 93% of us hate how bitter and how polarized the politics in this country have gotten. We hate how divided we've gotten. You know, everybody's been paying attention to this since the 2016 election. No matter how you voted, some of you are on one side, some of you are on the other. That's not my point at all. But I actually saw the problem starting a little bit earlier than that. For my job, I have a crazy job. I travel around, I give speeches, I talk to all different kinds of people. I do like 175 speeches a year, which is great. I mean, I talk to very left-wing audiences and very conservative audiences and everybody in between. And it was in this in the category of conservative audiences in 2014, I was doing this big rally of activists in New Hampshire. It was like 700 conservative activists in the audience. And they were really fired up. Why? Because the speakers, not me. It was because the other 15 speakers who were all running for president. They were all presidential candidates except me. And I was looking at the schedule. It's like, you know, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and you know, Scott Walker and then me. I'm like, how did I get in here? That's weird. I mean, the guy who runs the think tank that the audience hadn't really heard of before. So I thought to myself, you know, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to actually get people to be more positive here? Because it was a pretty, I have to say it was festive, but it was kind of negative. All the politicians were doing what politicians always do. They were like throwing raw steaks out into the audience and people were gobbling them up. They were saying, you're right, and the other side is stupid and evil. You know how politicians always do that? Because they have to get in front of a very favorable crowd and tell them that they're right and make them feel good about themselves, but also say terrible things about the people who are not there. That's what politicians always do. I was backstage listening to this, and I'm thinking, this is a bad thing coming in American politics. It's bad, because that's not good that Americans are talking about each other that way. Well, what can I do to make it a little bit better? So I got out there, I was doing my talk, and by the way, my own politics are conservative, so I was saying things that they mostly agreed with, right? They're clapping. But in the middle I said, wait a second, I want you to, I know I'm saying things that you find agreeable, But I want you to remember something. I want you to remember that the people who are not here because they disagree with you on policy, I'm talking about liberals, they're not stupid and they're not evil. They're simply Americans who disagree with you on politics. Your job is to persuade them with love. Now, I knew that was not going to be an applause line, right? But there was an applause line that came a second later because this lady in the audience, she says, actually, I think they're stupid and evil. And she gets a big round of applause, right? So, I was kind of a little hurt. I'm not going to lie. But, she actually wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. She was making a joke. So, why do I bring it up? Because at that moment, my mind went to, it was spontaneous. My mind went to Seattle. Why? It's my hometown. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. Seattle, Washington, as many of you know, is the most left-wing city in America. My father was a college professor. My mother was an artist. What do you think their politics were in Seattle? They were not my politics. I'm sort of the black sheep politically in my family. But let me tell you, I'm the only one, by the way. I'm the only one in my neighborhood. Let me tell you something about my parents. They weren't stupid and they weren't evil. Fantastic parents, really smart, really helpful to me all the way throughout gave me nothing but love throughout my support all throughout my life. And by the way, on the things that we disagree on, I am sure that they were right and I am wrong on a lot of things, right? And that lady in New Hampshire was insulting my mom. And I took it personally, just for that second. I thought to myself, what's wrong where strangers can insult the people that you love? The next night I was at some other place giving a talk, which I usually do. And it was still on my mind, it's really on my heart. So I asked the audience the question that I'm going to ask you right now. How many of you love somebody with whom you disagree politically? That's 100%. And that's a really good thing, right? It's great that we live in a country where we can disagree and still love each other. I mean, if those of you who didn't have your hands up because you're not really listening, but that's okay too. I want to live in a country where you can love people with whom you disagree politically. What I don't want is for some stranger to tell me that your loved one's an idiot. I don't want that. That's not right. I'm offended by that, and you should be too. So it reminds me of something as a lesson, a moral lesson that my dad taught me when I was a kid, which is this. It's actually not a mark of moral courage to stand up to people with whom you disagree. It's a good thing to do. I mean, if somebody's wrong on the other side and you're having a debate, that's all good. But that's not a mark of moral courage to say, you're wrong. You know what's a mark of moral courage? To stand up to people with whom you agree on behalf of people with whom you disagree. To say, it's not right to talk about those people when they're not here that way. That's moral courage. That, my friends, will lose you, friends. That'll make you less interesting, and you'll get invited to fewer parties, but you know in your heart it's the right thing to do. And I bet some of you have done it, and I bet you wish you did it more. And that's not what we're doing in America today. That thing in 2014, it got me thinking that the country has got a political train on the tracks that's coming toward us, and I don't like what it does. Look, I got political opinions, and so do you. That's fine. But it's not right the way that we're expressing these things. It's not that we disagree too much. Disagreement's great. It's a form of competition. And this is a country based on competition. Competition is great in sports. It's great in politics. We call it democracy. It's great in economics. We call it capitalism. And it's great in the competition of ideas. Because ideas need to collide in disagreement for us to be excellent and for us to learn. The problem is not that we disagree too much. The problem is that we don't disagree well. We have a major crisis. Now again, if we liked it, that'd be okay. But when 93% of Americans hate how divided we become, we're not doing it right. When almost 1 in 5 Americans have stopped talking to a family member because of politics, we're not doing it right. So I started out on a project to figure out how each of us could be called in our interior to greater freedom, to be masters of this, and to make this better. So what I'm going to do in the next half hour or so is I'm going to tell you what I think the big problem is, in a way that you're going to get it the first time, and then I'm going to give you ideas on how you can be a force for making America better. Now, I'm not going to tell you to change your political views, because I'm not going to change mine. I don't want you to change yours either. But if we do what we're supposed to do, we're going to leave here tonight all better and ready to knit the country back together more effectively. That's my job. Let's see if we can get that done. Okay, now what's the big problem? People often say that we're too uncivil, right? Or that we're too intolerant, or that we're too angry with each other. That's all wrong. All that's wrong. People ignore civility and tolerance. That's garbage. Garbage standards. If I told you that my wife and me that we're civil to each other, you're like, man, you need counseling, right? Or if I told you that my employees, they tolerate me, you'd say I have a big morale problem on my hands. Those are low standards. Great countries don't settle for civility and tolerance. We're also not too angry with each other because anger is not problematic. There's a lot of good social psychology that shows that anger is uncorrelated with separation and divorce between married couples. You can fight like cats and dogs. Anger is a hot emotion that says, I care about what you think and I want to change it. Right? It might not be pleasant, but you're not going to get divorced because you get angry. It's not going to happen. So, you know, most of you are going to get married. Those of you who are in college, you want to, fight all you want. No problem. Anger is not a big deal. However, if you take anger and you mix it with one thing, it turns deadly, and that's disgust. Anger and disgust, when you mix them together, that's like putting ammonia into bleach, and it creates chlorine gas. It's a dangerous compound. It has a specific name, and it's called contempt. Contempt, anger plus disgust, is the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another person. When you express contempt for somebody else, you can expect a permanent enemy because that's not a hot emotion anymore, it's a cold emotion that says you are not worth listening to, you're not worth caring about, you are actually worthless. There's nothing you can say that hurts somebody more than that. Think about it. When somebody treats you with contempt, the internet, in person, maybe at your Thanksgiving table, it just burns you. You don't want to talk to that person, you want to have nothing to do with that person. How many times have you treated somebody with contempt inadvertently? Well, let's get a little bit to the science of how contempt affects people. I have this friend, his name is John Gottman. He's a social psychologist, the world's leading expert in marital reconciliation. This guy's brought thousands of couples back together that were on their way to divorce court. This guy's a total hero. Anybody who makes couples not get divorced and so parents don't break up, so families don't break up, that guy's a hero. Right? Thousands of people have been brought back together by this guy. He has this trick, not really a trick, it's sort of his job, in his marriage laboratory. It's called the Gottman Marriage Laboratory. Look it up if you're interested. The guy's stuff's, in my view, interesting, fascinating actually. And John Gottman says that in one session, just meeting for a few minutes with a couple, he can predict with 94% accuracy if that couple will be divorced in 3 years. So you probably, you should want to know what he's looking for, right? What is he looking for? Eye rolling. When they're discussing something contentious, one side right? That's almost like physical abuse for a married couple. Like if I have a concern and you dismiss it, that's contempt. That hurts me more than anything else you could do because that says to me, you think I'm worthless. You think that what I said has no worth. He says that sarcasm, derision, dismissal, that these things are the most corrosive things that you can do and they're the best predictor of a couple getting divorced. Not alcohol abuse, not infidelity, certainly not anger, contempt in a relationship. It's a relationship killer. It's a love killer. Okay, so I asked John Gottman, I have a podcast, and I asked him on my podcast, well, what about politics? He says, oh, it's the worst. In politics, when you treat somebody with contempt, whether you know them or not, that person will hate you and disagree even more with your point of view. You'll never be able to come together. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is rolling your eyes and saying, that's stupid, dismissing people out of hand, which we all do, is a very, very impractical thing to do. I'm making a completely self-interested argument if you have strong political views. Why? Because nobody in the history of humanity has ever been convinced, been persuaded with insults. Saying, I hate you will never persuade anybody. Can't happen. So therefore, you got to ask yourself in politics today, if you're behaving with contempt and insulting people and dismissing people and rolling your eyes, what's your goal? What's your goal? People don't often ask this in America today. I've taken to asking people this. It's funny, you know. I have this book called Love Your Enemies, and you know the main criticism I'm getting from the press, I've done 50 newspaper, television and radio interviews over the past 10 days. I'm talking about it all the time. And mainstream journalists will say, well, what about people who are really evil? I'm saying like terrorists from Hamas? No. What they mean is people who have evil politics, evil points of view right here in America. That's the question. I said, well, okay, fellow Americans, right? Yeah. Well, what do you want if they disagree? What do you want? Do you want to hurt them? No. Do you want to exile them, kick them out of the country? No. Do you want to put them in jail? No. What do you want? Well, I want to convince them they're wrong. Well, telling them they're stupid and evil and deviant, do that? 0% of the time. That's a bad strategy. It's also an immoral strategy. Because you already told me, all of you just told me, that you love people with whom you disagree politically. Why on earth are you putting up with some talking head on television, or some newspaper columnist, or some guy on the radio, or some college professor, or somebody in the entertainment industry saying that your sister-in-law is an idiot? You should stand up for her, even if you disagree with her. See, the problem that we've got, right, is the contempt that's part of our culture today is hurting us. It's making us less persuasive. By the way, it's also making us less happy. This book that I wrote, it's amazing. I've been able to catch up with the latest in brain science on this. When you treat somebody else with contempt, that creates loneliness and depression. It creates higher levels of stress. For whom? For you, for the person who's treating somebody else with contempt. So ask yourself, do you wish America were less divided? Yes. Do you want to be more persuasive? Yes. Do you want to be happier? Of course. What are you going to do? You need to declare war on your own contempt. You need to express less contempt, not just toward those you love, but everybody. So this was my next objective, was to figure out how to do that, how to be less contemptuous. By the way, I'm guilty. I saw a clip of myself on CNN or Fox News or something, on TV, of debating somebody about some policy issue, taxes or whatever, and I rolled my eyes. I committed the mortal sin of debating. I treated the person I was debating with contempt. You think that person is going, that guy at the American Enterprise Institute, that think tank guy, he was making some really good points. No, you know what? That person no doubt went home and said, what a jerk. And I lost a convert forever. And you know what else I lost? I lost the ability for all the million people watching me on TV that night to think, I may not agree with that guy who runs the American Enterprise Institute, but he seemed like a nice person and he was making some good points. I sacrificed that too. Why? Because I'm a self-indulgent, weak person, that's why. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want you to do that anymore either. So what are we going to do? How are we going to fix it? Now, to begin with, we have to recognize that the problem is not that you're rotten people. I'm not a rotten person either. Because we have a bad habit. We talk to each other in a way that reflects our habits. We have all kinds of habits. The way we talk, the way we walk, the way we eat. All the things that we do are processed in a part of the brain that are habitual, part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. That's a little part of the brain, it's about the size of the end of your pinky. It's an ancient part of your brain that was evolved more than 1 million years ago. The part of your brain you're most familiar with is your prefrontal cortex, the big part of your brain behind your forehead. That processes all your conscious cognitions. That makes you, you. All the decisions that you make. I'm going to go hear that guy who runs a think tank give a lecture tonight at Baylor. That was your prefrontal cortex. But that doesn't govern your habits. Your habits are an automatic processing of rewards, despite all of your best intentions. That's your nucleus accumbens. That's super ancient. That was developed before people were modern humans. Why? Because when something is rewarding, you want to reinforce it so you can do it over again without having to think about it. You do more good things. Now, it also processes you doing bad things, but that give you a reward. There's all kinds of bad stuff that gives you a reward. Why would you smoke a cigarette? The answer is because it stimulates the neurotransmitter called dopamine, which gives you a little bit of pleasure. Well, your prefrontal cortex says you shouldn't be smoking these cigarettes. You could get cancer. It's expensive. You could set your bed on fire if you fall asleep with that thing. It's bad. It makes your mother sad. Stop that. Your nucleus accumbens like, yeah, just light it up, man. Light it up, right? Your brain is at war with itself. Same thing is true with all your habits, including the habit of talking to other people with contempt. Now, when I say we all have a habit of contempt, that's actually not quite true. 93% of Americans hate how divided we become. That means 7% don't hate how divided we become. For us, contempt is a habit. For the 7%, I call them the outrage industrial complex. For that 7% habit, it's not a habit, it's a way of life. Contempt is a living, right? There are a lot of people in America today who are getting rich and powerful and famous, or getting clicks, or getting prestige, or getting followers by convincing you to hate somebody else. That's their stock in trade. You're being used. You're being terrorized and bullied by a small minority that is a disproportionate megaphone telling you that the other side is not just people you agree with and should persuade, but are deviant and stupid and evil, and they like it when you're unhappy. They like it when you're fired up. They like it when you're outraged. Okay? I'm going to get back to that 7% a little bit later. I'm not going to treat them with contempt, but I'm going to tell you what you can do about that 7% and how you can erase that part from your life. Because you need to do that if you want to be a happier person. But let's stay in the 93%, those of us who have kind of a bad habit. Now, by the way, some of you might be saints and don't do this, but I'm talking about people like me who've been guilty. Okay, so how do you get rid of a habit? Now, the brain science of the nucleus accumbens says that you basically need to reprogram that little nodule inside your brain. And the way that you do it is not by saying, I'm never going to do this thing again. If you basically have a bad habit and just say, I won't do it, I won't do it, I won't do it, you will do it. That's because the nucleus accumbens is very strong. But there is a way, if you have a bad habit, to reprogram that little peanut inside your brain. And the way to do it is to do something else every time you're stimulated to do the bad thing. Okay? In other words, it's okay, I feel the desire to do something bad, stop, expand the time between stimulus and response, and put in what you want in that space. I'll explain that. And to begin with, great Buddhist masters always talk about expanding the space between stimulus and response. You're stimulated by stuff all day long. People say things, people look at you in a particular way, you have particular cognitions or emotions, that's a stimulus. The key thing if you're a master of yourself is that you should choose your response. If you're like a lesser animal, then you don't choose your response. You're stimulated, you respond automatically, right? It doesn't pass through your cerebral cortex. On the contrary, it's all in your back brain, all that stuff. If you, however, decide to be the master of yourself, the key thing to do is to expand the time. When you're stimulated, the first thing to do is to not respond. That's your first thing, just don't respond. Because the longer that you can practice to make that response time, the more likely you are to be able to choose your response. Then you're in control. Then you're the master. Then you're strong. Okay? Buddhist masters always say that. Your mother, she's a Buddhist master. How do I know? Because she said when you feel angry, count to 10 before you respond. That's the same thing that the Tibetan Buddhists say. Wait. Stimulus? Wait. That's number one. Number two, put something that's not your automatic response in the slot. So when you're talking about politics, you're on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and you get into a hot conversation with somebody else, and they stimulate you by saying, you're an idiot. Wait, and decide what you're going to say instead. What should you decide? When somebody treats you with contempt, don't respond with contempt, you're missing a big opportunity. You're going to be unhappy, unpersuasive, and you're going to rip people apart. Okay? You don't want to do that. What do you do instead? I was in search of the answer to this question. Like, I understand the stimulus and response thing. I just don't know what to put in the slot. Right? So I was thinking about this, and this was about the time when I was making this movie that we're screening, that you heard about before, that Danny told you about, called The Pursuit. This is coming out. We're screening this at Baylor. We have a Baylor screening. When is this? When is the Baylor screening? It was yesterday. Okay, so make sure and go see it yesterday. It's like, so, and if you didn't see the movie, by the way, it'll be out on Netflix starting in August, called The Pursuit. Now, when I was making this movie, the last scene of this movie is shot in the Himalayan foothills in this little town called Dharamsala in India. I was with the Dalai Lama, of all people. He's somebody I've been working with for 6.5 years. I love the Dalai Lama. He's a great teacher and a great friend to me. We've written articles together, we're working on a book project, we're talking about teaching students. I mean, it's fantastic. It's a partnership that I value and friendship that I value a lot. And when I was with the Dalai Lama, I was thinking about this problem. And I asked him, Your Holiness, now, by the way, for those of you who don't know, the Dalai Lama is the single most respected religious figure in the world. He's the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people. Right? I asked him, Your Holiness, when I feel contempt, when somebody treats me with contempt, and I feel contempt in response, what should I choose instead? And he said, at that moment, you should choose, no matter how you feel, choose warm-heartedness. And I said, well, you got anything else? Because that seems a little, I don't know, a little weak. Then I thought about it. So most of you probably don't know the story of the Dalai Lama. He's 84 years old. He'll be 84 in July. He was exiled when he was 24 years old, when the Chinese communists rolled through Tibet and exiled him. 24 years old. And he leads the Tibetan Buddhist people who were pacifists, and they were helpless, into exile. Broke, to be disappeared, to be forgotten. This is what always happens with tyrants. Why? I mean, I don't know. I mean, Tibet is a vast landmass, only 6 million people. There are a lot of reasons for it. But the point is, he was going to be disappeared. Nobody will ever hear from him again. But what happened? Fast forward 6 decades, and he's the world's most respected religious figure, and I'm talking about him on a stage in Baylor University. What happened? And the answer is he didn't respond to the contempt of the people who rolled through his country with contempt. On the contrary, he starts every day praying for the Chinese leaders that they'll live good and happy lives. And he never says an evil word about them. Not in public, not in private, not to his friends, not to anybody. He has answered contempt truly with warm-heartedness. That, my friends, to become the world's most respected religious figure, that's power. See, here's the deal. When you're treated with contempt and you answer with contempt, you're weak. Contempt is for weak people. Warm-heartedness and kindness and respect and love, that's for strong people, because that's hard. I asked him, what if I don't feel it? Your Holiness, what if I don't feel warm-hearted? He said, doesn't matter. Do it anyway. Pretend you do. There's a lot of research on this that shows that when you pretend to be a particular way, you will start to feel it, not vice versa. You want to feel happier? Smile even though you're not. Your brain will be fooled. You will become happier. You want to be more warm-hearted? Act more warm-hearted. You want to be more grateful? Act more grateful. That's your secret. You're in charge. You're not the slave. You're the master of yourself. So then I asked the next question. How do I do it? How do I remember it? How do I remember to act this way? That's when it really got interesting, because His Holiness said, remember a time in your life when somebody treated you with pure contempt and you accidentally answered with kindness and love. And remember how it made you feel. Don't remember anything else except how it made you feel. Remember the feeling. And if you remember that feeling, you'll recreate the action. I went back to my little room. I stay in a little room when I'm there. It's a little Tibetan room. And I thought about it. I thought, when was I treated with contempt when I accidentally answered with warm-heartedness? And I remembered a time. And I want to tell you about it, not because I want you to use my experience, but because I want you to remember yours. Okay? So one of your assignments is to remember a time when you did the right thing and remember how good it made you feel. Here's mine. This was 2006, 13 years ago. I was still a professor at Syracuse University. And my life was awesome. Because being a college professor is the world's best life. You know, I was teaching my classes, my graduate students were really high quality. Syracuse is a lot like Baylor. Really good university, really top students. And, you know, I was writing my books. Nobody ever read my books because they were very boring. But I wrote them and I enjoyed them, right? They were all kind of mathematical and all that. And then something weird happened. I wrote this book. It was about charitable giving, like who gives more, conservatives or liberals, Democrats or Republicans, religious people or secular people, poor people or rich people. And all the answers were different than what everybody thought. And it hit the news cycle from some weird reason in the right way. President Bush at the time was talking about charity, and the book took off. Suddenly, my book was selling hundreds of copies a day. I'm like this boring college professor with this mathematical book that's selling like crazy. And my life changed overnight. I started getting like calls from the press. I started going on TV, which was very disconcerting for me. And the weirdest thing of all, by the way, my life has never been the same. I've been doing this ever since. The weirdest thing was that I started getting email from people I'd never met before. I mean, it was so strange. You know, what happens when you have a book that's a bestseller is that people feel like they read your book, they feel like they know you as a person. So they talk to you like an old friend. Or if they hate the book, they talk to you like an intimate enemy. So 3 weeks or so after the book comes out, I'm sitting in my office, and you know, tons of emails are coming up from readers of this book. It was very easy to get my email address right on the university website. And this guy in Texas, in Dallas, he writes me and he says, "Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud." Bad beginning, okay? But I keep reading because I'm a good sport. And I notice that this email is like 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read this email, right? But, you know, I'm reading it, right? All right, I've got the email. The guy took the time to write it. I'm going to read it. And I thought I'm going to be really bummed out while I was reading it. But I noticed that this guy is going through every single thing in my book, chapter and verse, telling me how wrong and stupid I am. But in total detail. Like, you know, the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. Stuff like that. Like, wow. And 15 minutes into this email, I'm a slow reader. 15 minutes into this email, you know what I find? I became conscious of my emotions. You know what I was thinking? He read my book. I was filled with gratitude. I thought, you know, I got nothing to lose. I'm going to tell him. I'm just going to tell that guy. So I wrote him back, "Dear so-and-so, you know, I know you hated my book and you think I'm terrible and a stooge and you despise everything I stand for and you think it's the worst book you ever read. But let me tell you, you read every word. That book took me 2 years to write and I put my whole heart into it. I am truly grateful to you for reading my book. Thank you. Send." And then I go back to work, right? I'm thinking, I bet he'll never answer me. And 15 minutes later, ding, there's his response. Now I'm very apprehensive. Because I'm thinking, I bet he's furious. Or who knows? Like he's going to tell me he's going to kill me? I don't know what now, right? So I open it up. "Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call." Weird. What just happened? What just happened is I got power. I got a superpower. I had no idea. See, this guy didn't suddenly think he liked my book. He just suddenly realized he liked me. He liked me because I was nice to him. I was warm-hearted to him. I showed him some respect. I even showed him a little bit of love because I was actually honestly grateful to him for what he had done for me, and I thanked him for it. That changed the relationship completely. I did not have dinner with him, by the way. Because, you know, I'd probably be chained to a pipe in his basement in Dallas right now if I did that. That would be, like, not good. So I did, but I learned something that day, and I remembered it when the Dalai Lama asked me to remember it. When you treat somebody who treats you with contempt with warm-heartedness, you change one heart for sure, yours, and maybe that other person's heart as well. And I've remembered that ever since. That's helped me a lot. It's changed my life in many ways. And that's what we need to do, okay? Identified the problem, contempt, the solution, warm-heartedness in place of contempt. Is that a government program? No. Is that am I going to get politicians who do it? Doubtful. What am I calling you to do? To start a social movement in your own heart. Now, does that mean it's going to single-handedly save America? No. No. What it's going to do is it's going to make you more persuasive, and you're going to be a force for reconciliation, and you're going to be happier. There is nothing not to like if you do this. And it's free. So, now I'm going to tell you how to do it. Okay? I'm going to give you more specifics. Like you've got the outlines, right? You're going to go home ready to, you know, treat contempt with warm-heartedness. Let me give you some specific homework. See, I'm an academic, so I get to give homework. So I'm going to give you 3 assignments, what I want you to do. And I want you to do these 3 things within the next 24 hours, okay? Assignment number 1. I want you to refuse to be used. You are being, if you're paying attention to politics and you're participating, you're being used by people on your own side. People want to whip you up. People, and look, maybe they're hateful newspaper pundits if you're a big reader, and maybe if you like to watch cable television, which, you know, given the demographic here is like 0% of you are doing that. But if when I'm talking to people who are older, they're all like, yeah, I love MSNBC or Fox News. They're all watching this, like average age 72, right? Like, the market does not look good going forward, but that's a different point, right? Or maybe you're surrounding yourself with internet news sources where you're siloing your news feeds and only hearing from people who agree with you, who are forwarding the most outlandish, hateful stuff. That's probably everybody, at least inadvertently. No matter what, you have people who are trying to use you for clicks and for promotional dollars and for fame and prestige. Do you want to be used and be unhappier in the process? Of course not. I don't either. So what I want you to do, assignment number 1, is I want you to make a list. First of all, think of the person who's most manipulative in creating outrage. Okay? You got a face in your head, right? That's wrong, because you just thought of somebody you disagree with. You just thought of somebody on the other side. You got to think of people on your side. And again, I'm not telling you got the wrong side, because you need to keep your views and hold them well. But think of and make a list of the people on your side that want to make you hateful and want to make you angry and want to convince you that your sister-in-law, who's on the other side politically, is stupid and evil. Okay? Make the list, do it carefully, cross them off the list. You don't have to be hateful to them. You don't have to be contemptuous to them. You need to defend yourself by tuning them out. And if these are people in your actual life that you know, you need to say, I don't want you to talk about other people that way around me. You will get invited to fewer parties, guaranteed. But you'll feel better about yourself. And you'll be happier. Number 1, stand up to the man. Number 2, look at the big opportunity around you, which is contempt itself. You know, ordinarily, when you talk about a pathogen, something that's really bad, I would urge you to avoid it, right? Like, I would urge you not to drink abusively so you don't become an alcoholic. I would urge you not to take drugs. I would urge you, when your friend is like really, really sick, to not let the person cough in your face, right? These are pretty obvious things, right? Contempt is a pathogen, and I'm urging you to go find it, to go look for it, to go face it. Why? Because that's your opportunity to be happier. You know, I have always admired missionaries, and I've had a lot of missionaries in my family. And I have a lot of friends who are Latter-day Saints, Mormons, lots. As a matter of fact, I'm the commencement speaker at Brigham Young University next month. I'm going to have 19,000 Mormons going to be listening to give some version of this talk. I won't go on this long for graduation because they'll all walk out. But, okay, and most of them, they go on these 2-year missions, right? I admire them because they face so much resistance with bravery. Missionaries, it's unbelievable. You know, they go into a community, and nobody, you know words that nobody in life has ever said? Oh, look, great, there's missionaries on the porch. No, everybody's like, ugh, pretend we're not home. Nobody wants to be proselytized at their door. Nobody wants that, right? So, okay, so maybe you're a missionary, you don't like that resistance, you don't like that hatred, you don't like that contempt. You know the best way to avoid it? Only go to the houses of people who already have the faith. They'll give you a sandwich. They'll be super nice to you, right? But that's idiotic, because that's not the point of being a missionary. The point of being a missionary is the resistance. The point of being a missionary is going where they don't have the faith, no matter what the faith is. Okay, and that is the sort. Have you ever met anybody happier than a missionary? Source of joy for these people. Why do I bring that up? Because you're missionaries. If you want to do this with me, if you're willing to do this with me, you got to go out into the mission field. You got to go where people don't have this, where people are treating each other with contempt, where people are treating you with contempt, and see that as your golden opportunity. You go someplace, people treat you with contempt, you say, ha-ha, thank you. I'm going to answer with warm-heartedness, and I'm going to be happier, and maybe I change your heart, and I'm going to be a little bit more persuasive, especially, by the way, to people who are watching the interaction. If you read this book that I wrote, you will see the proof that if you want other people to see you as a leader, as a successful person, and having a persuasive argument, have them witness you be the nice one. And that's what you want. You want people to say, there was a mean one, there was a nice one, I like the nice one. Nice guys and girls finish first when it comes to ideological arguments. Okay, great. So this is your opportunity to knit the country back together in a small way, one little interaction at a time, to be more persuasive and to be happier. It's up to you. It's free. You get to do that, but you got to go looking for it. So how do you find how do you find more contempt? Well, super easy. Go on social media for 10 seconds. Say anything about your politics on social media. You will be treated with contempt summarily. You know, I'm treated with contempt constantly because I have I have a relatively public job, and so I'm talking on TV and on the radio and I'm talking on social media, and it's just all day cascading down, right? I could answer with contempt. That wastes the opportunity. So I have made a public commitment, so public I wrote a book called Love Your Enemies. If I treat people with contempt, man, am I going to hear about it? Hypocrite. I've basically committed myself for the rest of my life to treating people with contempt, who treat me with contempt, with warm-heartedness. Do that. Go in search of it. Go make more friends who disagree with you. It's very easy to surround yourself with people who agree with you all the time. College campuses have become very bad at making sure that opposing points of view, that they don't surround you very much. Baylor's better. Baylor's kind of an oasis in this, but a lot of colleges and universities around the United States, they say it's dangerous. You're unsafe if you hear things you disagree with, right? Safe spaces, trigger warnings, that stuff's terrible for you. That's actually dangerous for people to get that. Well, the only thing that makes you unsafe is being told you're unsafe. On the contrary, that's your opportunity. Go places where people disagree with you and go there with love. When you're on the internet, by the way, remember my guy John Gottman, the marriage counselor? He's got this technique that he's got for couples that are going to get a divorce. He calls it his 5-to-1 rule. Where, and the thing is, when you're first in love, you can't think of anything to criticize about the other person. But when you're about to get divorced, you can't think of anything but criticisms. So what he does is he creates a model of the early days, even though people are quarreling with each other. He makes them carry around notebooks, and every time they want to say something nasty to each other, they have to write it down, and then they have to put 5 nice things in front of it and say those things first. It's called the 5-to-1 rule. So it's like, she picked me up late again. Boy, I'm going to lay into her for that. Okay, but first, you look beautiful tonight. And thank you for making me dinner. It was really considerate and kind of you. And, I got to tell you, I love your mother. Forget that. You get the idea. And by the time you get through the 5 loving ones, you don't get to the 6th nasty one. Do 5-to-1 on the internet. Commit yourself to 5 beautiful, positive, loving things for every snarky, nasty, sarcastic thing you were going to say. For every criticism. That's all. I'm not telling you never to be sarcastic, never to be critical. I'm just saying do the 5 things first. You're going to be a different person. People are going to see you differently. People are going to probably unfollow you because you're less fun to follow. You're going to be happier. And people who do continue to watch your interactions are going to go, there's something about her, something about him. I like that person. You'll be better. Look for contempt. That's assignment number 2. Look for contempt. It's your opportunity. Number 3. Assignment number 3. You need to make a better effort to show gratitude. Remember my guy in Texas? The way I anesthetized his contempt was by saying thank you honestly. I could have been insincere, like, thank you for your feedback, man, right? No, I was actually grateful. Thank you. I can't believe you read the whole thing. I was honestly grateful, and people can tell, right? You need to show more gratitude, and not just to manipulate other people. Actually, gratitude is incredibly appropriate when you think about it. We have a tendency to be real ingrates. Those of us who are from the United States, we often forget that we're in the freest, most prosperous country in the history of the world, where we can disagree and there's no knock in the night. There's no jackbooted thug. Often every year I'll keynote this retreat for all the members of Congress. And I'll often say, how many of you wish we lived in a one-party state, like Venezuela? They're like, nobody. I said, you just told me you're grateful for the other party. Because if you don't live in a one-party state, it means there have to be another party, and the parties have to disagree, so therefore if you're a Republican, you just told me you're grateful for Democrats. It doesn't mean you agree with Democrats, you shouldn't, but you're grateful for them. The same thing is true all across our ideology. Unless you wish that there were no disagreement, there was no competition, there was no nothing, you're grateful for people with whom you disagree. And that's really important that we live in a society where we can do that and where we're not actually in danger. It's unprecedented in world history, as a matter of fact. Gratitude is appropriate, but we forget it a lot. When we make an effort to not forget it and we express it, particularly to other individuals, it's magic. It's also magic on you. There's these 2 guys University of California, Santa Barbara, who do research on gratitude. And one of their experiments, they take a bunch of undergraduate students, they put them in two groups, treatment and control, like a drug test, random assignment. And the first group, they have to make a list of things like in the news. What are the top news items of the week? And they write them down. And the other group has to make a list of the top things for which they're grateful in their lives, personally. Now, each day they review their lists for 5 minutes, and each Sunday they have to update their lists. And at the end of 10 weeks, the gratitude listers are 25% happier than the current events listers. That's free. You should be doing that. I am doing that. I've taken to doing that. It's very important in my life. You can do that all you want. And the more that you remember gratitude in your life, the more you'll express it. The more you express it, the more you'll be answering contempt with warm-heartedness, and you'll be more persuasive, happier, and you'll bring people together. That's the instant kind of warm-heartedness is gratitude. There's this book that I read when I was your age. And then I came back to it later. And it's one of my favorite books, actually. Some of you may have heard of it. If you haven't, you should get it. It's by a man, he wrote it in 1936, very old book. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People, by a self-improvement writer named Dale Carnegie. And it sounds super cheesy, right? Or like a way to manipulate people to your will. It's not. It's a beautiful book about how to treat people ethically and how to be a happier person. And there's one place in it, really is a very moving place, where he's talking about, where Dale Carnegie is interviewing this magician. Because he goes all over the country, the most successful people, and he asks them for the secrets to success. It's incredibly simple. And there's this guy named Howard Thurston in New York. He's known as the world's greatest performer, right? World's greatest performer. So Dale Carnegie goes to his last performance. He's been doing it 8 times a week for 40 years to watch his last performance, to figure out why he's the world's greatest performer. So he's sitting in the audience, and he goes, aha! He figures it out. And he goes backstage afterward to Howard Thurston and says, I understand your trick. I've got it. I know why you are the world's greatest performer. He says, why? He says, because you truly connect with the audience as if it were your first night, even after 40 years. How do you do it? I mean, a bunch of people going to New York watching a magic act, very conventional stuff, sawing ladies in half and, rabbits out of hats and dumb stuff, tricks, card tricks, whatever. But you make it look, it's amazing because you're so into it. You're connecting with your audience like the first night of your career. Every night, how do you do it? He says, it's simple. Every night before I go out, I say a little prayer. I say in my dressing room to myself, I am truly grateful for the people who came to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the best I possibly can. Then before he goes out, he stands at the footlights, right before he goes out on stage. He says to himself, I love my audience. I love my audience. And then it's showtime. That's the magic. That's what I say. I get to do this 175 times a year, not exactly these remarks. I get to talk to people about ideas. You know what you're doing right now? You're making it possible for me to make my living. It's my job. I love my job. I get to do something that's you're gonna be happier because of this. Our country's gonna be better if we do this together. And I get to make my living doing this. I'm super grateful to you because if you didn't come, if nobody came, that's the end. I'm grateful to you for that, just like Howard Thurston the magician. And that gratitude, I hope it shows. And if you have gratitude for living in the greatest country, the freest, most prosperous country in the history of the world, of a country that can debate things openly, that can make progress, that can be a gift to the world. If you're grateful to be part of that, you got to tell people on the other side. And in so doing, you're going to have the magic. So let's do this. Let's be missionaries. This is an old sign that some of you who are Southern Baptists that you see in churches. I'm a Catholic. We don't see it as much, but I have seen this in a Catholic church too, or Catholic retreat center too. It's not a sign when you're going into the church. It's a sign as you're going out to the parking lot. So you've been in a service, and you go out to the parking lot, and the sign over the door, you know what it says? You are now entering mission territory. Right? That's not just a religious thing. Maybe not all of you are super religious. That's okay. But if you want to spread this, and you want to make things better, and you want to be happier, and you want to be more persuasive, the thing that you need to remember when you leave here tonight is when you have a conflict with somebody, which will be very soon, remember that you are in mission territory. Use it wisely, and let's really make the country great. God bless you, and thank you. We have time for a little Q&A. We have a little bit of time. Molly, how much time do we have?
We got about 10 or 15 minutes.
Great. I'd love to hear anything that's on your mind. We'll start right here in the back because you got the mic right next to you. Yes, sir. Give me your name and what do you study?
Yeah, my name is Mark Richards. I'm a finance major.
Perfect.
Was curious if you have any opinion on the role of humility in kind of the warm-heartedness and self, I guess two different things maybe, but humility and self-forgetfulness. So there's kind of this idea of you could do all these things for your own self-interest and kind of gaining, as you said, power. And some people, in the same way that some people read Dale Carnegie in a power-hungry kind of way, they might adopt this in kind of a power-seeking or power-hungry way. What would you say is maybe a response to that, if there is a response to that, or if that's not necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. It's true. I mean, you can sort of misuse everybody, anything. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be warm-hearted. I'm going to show that guy, which is, be kind of ironic under the circumstances. Pride is ultimately, it's related to the ultimate negative emotion, which is fear. People have a tendency to say that hate is the opposite of love. Love is the ultimate positive emotion. Fear is the ultimate negative emotion. Hatred is downstream from fear. Pride and fear live together. It's basically an inability to forget your own prestige and position, which is it's like a prison. It's torture, actually. There's nothing that's more exhausting and yet boring than yourself. I mean, thinking about your own, I was like, come on, really? I got to think about this again and again and again? Fear holds us back from the humility that our hearts want. Humility is ultimately an expression of love for others. And that's what our hearts want. I mean, happiness, the nuclear fuel of happiness is love. All the things that I'm talking about here are when you're treated with hatred, answer with love. That's the reason I called my book, Love Your Enemies. That comes from the 5th chapter of Matthew, the 44th verse. The ultimate subversive lesson is to love your enemies. It didn't say, be civil to your enemies. Jesus didn't say that, right? Jesus said, love your enemies because he was a true subversive. He was giving people the source of true power by saying, you want to love more. It's easy to love your friends. It's easy to love your family members sometimes. It's really, really hard to love the people who persecute you. But in so doing, you will, with this humility, you'll grab the source of your own happiness, which is ultimately the subversive power that you seek. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. So if you want to remember one thing, St. Augustine, he basically, in religion, it's very complicated, and there's all these formulas, and you have to remember all this stuff, right? And there's a lot of rules, and I got it, right? I mean, I'm traditionally religious, but sometimes I'm exhausted too by that, right? So St. Augustine, he in the year 300, he boils it down to one thing. He says, love and do what you will. Love is to will the good of the other. And if you love, do whatever you want, it's going to be okay. And it is impossible to answer contempt with contempt if you're actually motivated by love, because you deserve the happiness that's written on your own heart. Thank you for that beautiful question. All right, who's next? Looks like we got no, come on. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you again for this talk. It seems to me there's something else that's
It's on. Yeah.
Equally dangerous, and it's not so much the facing the person with contempt who attacks you, but the kind of back room talk that emerges among people who do already think the way you do. It's sort of a gossip.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have any practical advice for avoiding that? Because that seems to me as poisonous as the anger that arises in you when somebody challenges.
Yeah, most gossip is actually sort of if pride motivates a lot of the things that we're talking about here, the daughter of pride is envy, right? And envy is so bad. There's like 2 commandments against it. It's so bad. Envy is horrible for you. Envy will eat your heart out. Envy basically means I hope somebody else doesn't have something good, even if I don't have it either. It's the worst. If you want to be unhappy, be envious. You know perfectly that that's when you're most miserable, is when you're envious, right? And gossip largely comes from envy. We're going to get around together and we're going to talk about somebody else. What is the antidote to that? There's always a virtue that's an antidote to these vices. And the antidote to pride, you told me it's humility, right? The antidote to envy and gossip, you know what it is? This is subversive. Admiration. Admiration. When was the last time that you admired somebody who wasn't there? See, that's the opposite of gossip, isn't it? You're talking about, you believe that she's like, did you see her? She looks awful today, right? Did you see her? She looks great today, even though she's not there. If you want to fight the envy that's eating out your heart, you need to express admiration, even though the person will give you no credit for it. Again, I'm giving you all this really wacky, upside-down, subversive advice, right? It's like a guy from Washington, D.C. He came here to told me the black is white and up is down, right? This is what you do. I guarantee that using this heavenly virtue will just counteract that deadly vice of gossip. Will people want? It's just funny, you know. There's a word in German, Schadenfreude, which is to celebrate the misfortune of other people. Right? It's actually gossip on steroids. Like, can you believe? Yeah, you got fired. Awesome. You know, I really enjoyed that. It's so horrible that people are like this. You got to counteract that in your own life if you actually want to be happier. You know, you got something bad to say about somebody, come over here and say it next to me because I want to hear it. Right? No. If you got something good to say about somebody, I want to hear it. And I'm going to talk about people who are not here in a way that's most admiring in the way that I possibly can. Okay, it's counterintuitive and it's hard. Try it. So put that on your list. Make that assignment number 4. Put it on your list as admire somebody not in their presence and see how it makes other people act and see how it makes you feel. You'll never say, you know, I sure am sorry I didn't gossip more. You won't ever say that. It's a really good thing to do. And so that's the end of it. Who's next? Anybody next? All right. Yes, sir. We got a mic coming down to you.
First off, thank you very much. How would you compare today's political situation with kind of a history of kind of the leading up to the Civil War and other areas where we've had issues where both sides stopped talking to each other? How do you kind of parallel this with other historical events?
Thank you. That's a great question. I love that. And the answer, according to political scientists who have been studying polarization, is that we're more polarized now than at any time since the 1850s. There are a lot of ways to measure this. This is not to say that we're on the verge of a hot shooting civil war, because we have much stronger institutions that get. I have no fear today that we're about to split apart as a country and to kill each other. But we are as polarized as we were in the 1850s. Okay, so what happened? Of course, there was a civil war, and then the country had to come back again together. And here's the good news, is after periods of polarization, people say, that was miserable, I don't like it, I want something better. And what inevitably will occur is a personal revolution. You're not going to get, no politician is going to spontaneously emerge who's going to bring America together. On the contrary, leaders in democratic capitalist society, they're just a bunch of followers. Right? CEOs and politicians are just followers. You create signals, they follow the signals. There's a parade going down the street, a politician says, I got to get in front of that parade because it's, you know, going down the street, it needs a leader. That's not leadership. That's technically a leader, but that's not leadership. That's the way, God bless them, right? I mean, look, I run a company, I'm a follower too, in a lot of ways. So, what does that mean? We got to create a different parade. And that parade starts with you. And if nobody else is walking with you, it doesn't really matter because you're still going to be happier and more persuasive. It doesn't matter. Walk down the alley, walk away. It's like, declare your independence. Okay, now the good news is after periods of extreme polarization, typically these interior revolutions, they tend to occur. So after the Civil War, following the Civil War, there was a couple of really bad financial crises. And up to about the turn of the century. And then there was horrible political populism. There was a guy named William Jennings Bryan who was more populist than any of the most populist politicians that we see today. And after that, the country was sick of it, and that's when we got Dale Carnegie. And that's when we got a guy named Napoleon Hill, and that's when we got the tent revival religious movements. And basically, these were interior revolutions where people said, no, I got to be the master of me. And I don't like it, and I'm not going to put up with it. And so I'm basically, the reason I wrote a book called Love Your Enemies, because I want to give you, it's an instruction manual. I want you to be able to say, I'm going to do this revolution. Nobody follows me, I don't really care. But this is the way I'm going to live my life from now on. And if enough people do it at the same time, then we get a different country. but it starts with you. And it has happened before, and it can happen again. I'm convinced it will.
Do we have time for one more?
Got time for one more. If we got one more, we got time for one more. Yes, sir. You get the last one?
I just have a quick question for you real quick. So we kind of talked more about adversity one-on-one with showing them a warm heart. As using your example earlier about how you talked behind the presidential candidates and how the whole crowd was kind of hostile, how do you now, looking back at that, would, I guess, be warm-hearted to all of them and show them more compassion? And how do you think you would persuade them differently?
It's good. It would have been very hard given the market conditions under the circumstances. I inadvertently did the right thing, I think, by telling the audience that their job was to persuade with love, right? I don't think I could have done a lot more than that, but I think that advising, because I was advising a lot of the candidates at the same time. A lot of those people, they're my friends. These are the people I work with. I run a think tank in Washington, D.C. It's not like I'm so important, but they come to my place for ideas, right? I would have been a lot more aggressive in talking about these things. Now, most of them would have said, you're full of it. You're not running anything. You're not running for anything. You're just a guy who runs a nonprofit. You're not trying to win off it. Trust me, that's not going to work. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. But I would have been, if I had had the presence of mind and the knowledge that I currently have, and going forward, this is certainly going to be the case, I am simply not going to hold back. I'm not going to say, yeah, look, you got 3 weeks left in your election, sock it to them. Spread a rumor that the person's some sort of weird deviant. I'm just not going to, I've never given that advice, but you get my point. I'm just going to be more overt about these moral principles because this is who I am as a person. Was I enough? I did a little bit by accident. I would have done a lot more, and I would have done it in a spirit of love and solidarity and brotherhood with these candidates because I do believe that they want to be good people too. They're just like us. They're just trying to follow market signals. I'm giving you advice and me advice on how we can do it better. I'm going to give them advice too. Will they take it? I don't know. I'll gratefully accept your prayers for your country and for the candidates. God bless you.